So two more sections we're going to go through in class in initial administration: securing data and OS resources. So we have our data loaded, we want to secure it, and then finally promotion of content. So in this section, securing data and OS resources, we're going to decide where to apply our access controls to secure our data. We'll look at inheritance and precedence for CAS access controls. So similar to we did for general authorization, we'll do for CAS authorization. And we'll secure our CAS libraries and tables using SAS Environment Manager and also using the CLI and Castle and Python code. So our diagram that we've seen already of the 5 different authorization systems we need to be aware of. We talked about the general authorization system to do folders and content. In 9.4 we had one authorization system within the software. In VIA it's a little different. We have the general authorization system for folders and content, and then the CAS authorization system for data. So they're split. And that's what we're going to look at now. But you should also remember that the other authorization systems are still important to you. In CAS, when you're using path-based CAS libs, the permissions for a file on the file system, the source of your CAS libs, is also going to be important. If the user who's loading the data doesn't have read access to the data in the path of the CAS lib, then they're not going to be able to load the data, even if they have the correct permissions within CAS. So remember to pay attention to the file system permissions also. So CAS authorization, the target for CAS authorization is CAS libraries, tables, and we don't talk about it much, but you can also set authorizations on actions and action sets. So the things that we can do, the actions we can do within CAS, you can set authorization on them to prevent some users doing one action or another action. CAS authorization system is RDA-BMS-like, so we're talking about data. It's similar to other authorization systems that look at data for databases. Inheritance is from parent to child, similar to 9.4. Precedence is a little bit more like 9.4 than the general authorization system is. So the proximity of the parent object to which a permission is applied is important in the CAS authorization system. And in terms of access controls, the access control for a user beats the access control for a group. And that was similar to it was in 9.4 also. But again, similar to the general authorization system, there's a flat group hierarchy. So where you are, in terms of group membership, doesn't matter how you get your group memberships, it's evaluated in a flat manner. So whether you're a direct member of a group or an indirect member of a group, it doesn't matter, you're just a member of those groups. So inheritance is down the hierarchy. The top of the hierarchy is the CAS lib. The next level down is the tables within the CAS lib. And then we can also set permissions in CAS on the rows within a table or even the columns within a table. We can set column permissions also. And as I mentioned before in the previous slide, the closer an access control is to the object that we're looking at is more important. And group membership is important, but it's evaluated in a flat manner. These are the permissions we have in CAS. We saw a slide similar to this for the general authorization system. They're a little bit different for CAS because we're talking about data. We get things like read info, which allows us to traverse the objects in the tree, so from the CAS lib down to the tables and columns. Manage access is like secure, that's the one that allows us to set access controls. They're all sort of database-like, so create table, drop table, select permissions, and we show you on the slide what the permission relates to. So some of them relate just to CAS libs, some of them like select relate to tables and columns only. The two that are highlighted are, I mentioned the just-in-time load, so the ability for to give people permission so that a table, if it's not in memory and a person hits a report, it's automatically loaded into memory. The two permissions you need for that are promote on the CAS lib or limited promote on the tables within the CastLib. If you set the users up to have those permissions, then they'll have that functionality of the data automatically loading. Conversely, if you don't want that to happen, maybe the data's, you want to control when data is loaded. If you don't give users those permissions, then that data won't be automatically loaded for them on demand. Some additional permissions that we have for the CAS system. So the alter permissions, and then on the table level, the same type of permissions we get in the database: insert, delete, update. And a couple that apply just to actions and action sets. So execute and load apply just to actions and action sets. Now we've got the slides that are similar to the ones we saw for CAS authorization, as an example for VIA authorization. So we have the symbols are the same. So the red with the line through it means not authorized due to either it's inherited from a parent object or a group membership, or because, again, CAS authorization system, like general authorization, has an implicit deny. So you have to be granted permission. You have an implicit deny to start off with. And then if we put the diamond beside it, the black diamond, that's an explicit deny, so applied for that principle on that object. The green tick mark is authorized due to a grant inherited from a parent or from group membership. And if we put the black diamond beside that, it means it's authorized directly. So an explicit grant applied for the principle on that particular object. So those are the symbols you see in the interface and the ones we use in the diagram. So let's look at this for CAS authorization. So if you think of the example we're maybe looking at one permission, say the select permission, for one particular user. In the example, we're saying Hamish. So any permission not specified or inherited is implicitly prohibited. When you create an object, create a CastLib, then SAS administrators have permission for the CastLib, and the person who creates it has permission to the CastLib. No one else has permission initially. You have to grant any other permissions you want right away. You can set an explicit grant to override that implicit deny. You could set that on the table. You can set it on the CastLib. So an explicit grant is going to override that implicit deny. Otherwise, we couldn't grant people access to things. If you do an explicit deny on top of the implicit deny, it doesn't make any difference, right? If you do an explicit deny on top of an explicit grant, then you're going to deny further down the hierarchy. It overrides it. That makes sense too. If you do an explicit grant below an explicit deny, this is the one that's different from the general authorization system. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah, you're going to get a grant, right? General authorization, that's where we had the big X mark because prohibit always wins, right? CAS authorization is a little bit more like 9.4 was. You can override an explicit deny by doing an explicit grant. Okay? Oh, I think we had something there. So if you grant permission in a child object, even if it's denied in the parent, that's a contrast with the general authorization system. So where do you apply the access controls? Well, the best practice is definitely to apply them to the CastLib, right? Just in terms of being able to manage your permissions. If you apply them to the CastLib and you use the inheritance to allow the tables within the CastLibs to get their permissions from their parent object, it just makes your life easier, right? You don't have different permissions on different tables. You can apply them to the in-memory tables too, though. So I'm sure we can all probably come up with scenarios where a CastLib has a set of permissions for a bunch of tables, but one table within the CastLib might need some different set of permissions. So it is possible to apply them to the tables. It's not recommended, but you can do it, and there definitely are scenarios that you would want to do it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, definitely make sure that you secure the tables on the file system or in the database, because that authorization system needs to be accurate too, to make your security model work, and also to make sure you can access the data you need to access. So CAS libraries, source tables, in-memory tables if you need to. You can do it in the interface. We will look at doing it in the interface, just like we did for general authorization. You can do it via the CLI. We will mostly do it via the CLI in the class because it's quicker and it's a little bit easier to do. It's a lot less clicks if you do it via the CLI. To get to the CAS authorization system in Environment Manager, it's in the Data tab. You can right-click and select Edit Authorization. Prefer to set access controls on the data source, which is the CAS lib. Right-click. Choose Edit from the context menu. You'll get a window like this, which is similar to the general authorization system. We do get a nice feature in CAS that we don't get in general. We get a little slider here, which has common access patterns. So there's three choices. I think it's read, write, and full control, if I remember correctly. So if you drag your slider to read, your icons will change from to reflect the read pattern here. If you drag it to write, the icons will change to reflect the write pattern there. Or you can click on the individual cells to apply it just like you did in the general authorization system. CAS libs and tables, the permissions are almost exactly the same. The permissions that you see will be based on what object you're clicking on. But we don't have the convey issue that we had in the general authorization system. So these permissions are for the object and they're inherited by the children. There's no separation of inherited permissions with permissions applied to the object in CAS. Effective access we can get in a similar fashion than we did. You can click on the I symbol, click in the cell, click in the I symbol, and it will bring up a window which shows you the origins of the effective access for that object for the principal that you clicked on. So it's called the origins window, and it lists the effective access for CAS access controls. So that's a way you can go in and debug why someone doesn't have access to something or why they do and they shouldn't. The programming interfaces, on the left we have proc CAS code. It's the access control action set and the update some ACS table action, which sets access controls, in this case on a table, and you can pass in this syntax, a series of access controls and set your access controls via proc CAS. And on the right hand side, you see it via Python. Slightly different syntax, but basically you're passing in exactly the same parameters from the two. So whatever you prefer, if you're a Python programmer, you'd obviously use the Python. If you're a SAS programmer, use proc CAS. And then, of course, there's a pattern emerging in the admin materials. There's a CLI that allows you to do it, and you can do it via the CLI. Set access controls on a CAS lib, set access controls on a table via the CLI. And then another nice feature of the CLI is you can actually export the access controls that are on a table or a CAS lib. What that will do is export them out to a JSON file, and then you can actually use that JSON file. You could take it over to another system and import them and apply the same access controls on another system. You can take the JSON file and edit it and build out your permissions in the JSON file, and then reapply the JSON file to your system. So a way to export and import permissions for CAS libs. That's pretty powerful. All right, we have another hands-on. We're going to set the permissions on the CAS libs. For a library and a table, we'll look at testing effective access, similar to we did for the general authorization system. And then you'll do it in a number of different ways using Python and using proc CAS code. All right, we have another quiz. Why should I do all the work? Let's get you guys doing something, huh? Possible values for setting in CAS access control include grant, row level, grant, and deny. We didn't really talk about row level, right? But you can do it. Yeah, it's true. So maybe not fair. We didn't talk about row level very much. There is a supplementary section in the materials there that about row level grants, and there's also a supplementary hands-on. So if you're interested in row level, you can go in and do that in the VLE. We recommend you set CAS access controls on CAS libs only and avoid setting them on CAS tables. True. The object hierarchy is important in determining precedence in CAS. Good. CAS administrators who have assumed a super user role in the SAS Environment Manager are unrestricted in the CAS authorization system. True. And that's maybe not a fair question either, because we didn't go into a lot of detail on that. You can use general authorization system to define a row level grant. False, yeah. CAS authorization system. That's it. We have a supplemental section there. As I mentioned, it does deal with row level permissions, so if that's something you're interested in, you can go look at that.